We've seen electricity rates jump by about 25% across most states in recent months. While 25% was an average increase, some consumers have seen their bills double this year. We are an energy-rich nation that has deliberately burdened our households and businesses with high energy costs, plunging an increasing number of people into energy poverty. Joining me now is energy expert and author of Fossil Future, Alex Epstein. Alex, Australia has embraced net zero and as has been the experience elsewhere around the world. That move away from reliable, cheap forms of energy towards renewables is a costly exercise, despite what we keep hearing about renewables being the cheapest form of energy.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. The renewable movement consists of two things that add cost. So one is the restriction of the availability of fossil fuels. So the more you restrict the availability of fossil fuels by opposing fossil fuel investment, fossil fuel production, fossil fuel refining, fossil fuel transportation, the more that decreases the available supply, and so prices go up. And then the other thing is foisting solar and wind on us, which are unreliable, when they're not actually able to compete on a free market and provide reliable electricity at a lower cost. So on the one hand, you make fossil fuels more expensive and you're still depending on them, but then you also add this cost of the renewables, or as I call them, unreliables. If the solar and wind are actually good, then what happens is they should just be put on a level playing field and they should actually compete over time with no restrictions on fossil fuels.
Well, the Liberal Party, the Coalition in Australia, is moving towards a commitment to a coal to nuclear transition. What do you think of that strategy? We are blessed with the world's biggest reserves of uranium in this country, and if we're going to stop using coal, we do need baseload power. Is nuclear the answer?
I mean, possibly, but on what timetable are we talking about here? I mean, Australia has a ban on nuclear. There is no domestic nuclear industry. Nuclear around the world is opposed and I would argue criminalized by the green movement. So the way I'd think of it is you want to liberate nuclear in Australia so that it can evolve to its potential. But the idea of saying, let's get rid of coal, which is just, the center of Australia's electricity and such a good resource for a long time, that is a disastrous thing. So it's not about replacing coal with nuclear. It's about liberating nuclear and seeing how well it can do in Australia and beyond.
Now, I want to play you a clip from US presidential hopeful who's asked about climate change and fossil fuels, and I just thought his response was absolutely fascinating.
You've coined this term climatism.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
I think it refers to an ideology that says we have to abandon fossil fuels and carbon emissions at all cost to stave off existential climate risks for humanity. I think the right question we should be asking is what advances human prosperity? That's what I care about. That's what I will care about measuring as the leader of this country, rather than obsessing over a cult of carbon.
When people point to the 101-degree water temperatures in Florida or the heat waves throughout the country or the unparalleled storms and climate events, how do you respond?
I respond by saying that if the same shoe fit the other foot, and you disagreed with that policy and somebody else were picking up anecdotal data from the middle of Arkansas who didn't go to Harvard, you'd be laughing them off the stage as a bunch of rubes who didn't know how to follow data based on anecdotal evidence.
Vivek Ramaswamy, I think he just absolutely nailed that interview. He makes no apologies for looking at the data and saying what's best for humankind. Even if you accept that climate change is real and man-made and is going to see temperatures rise, what does that really mean if we're going to stop using fossil fuels? What's the impact? What do you make of the arguments he's bringing to the debate?
Well, I think he's a smart guy, and he's a smart guy who's read Fossil Future. This is not a secret. He's said it publicly. And when he started reading it, I think he was already good on this issue, but he started making some of, I think, the most important points of Fossil Future. One early one he made right as he was reading the book was that we need to stop equating climate change with climate danger. he now uses the statistic that I've helped popularize. It's not my stat, but it's just data. But that climate-related disaster deaths have gone down by 98% over the last 100 years. What that means is that whatever has happened to climate negatively, if anything, it's been far, if net anything, I should say, it's been far outweighed by our ability to deal with climate, which depends on fossil fuels for heating and air conditioning and irrigation and building sturdy buildings, et cetera. So I think he's got the idea of looking at this from a human-centered perspective and looking at both the benefits and the side effects of fossil fuels with precision. So I'm happy to have had any role that I've had in helping him do that. And it's great that he's sharing that with others.
Well, that human-centered perspective is missing from so much of the debate, from so much of what politicians say, because you look at Australia, we are so blessed with natural resources, not just uranium, but coal, gas. And yet we've got citizens who won't turn on the heating in the middle of winter because they're terrified of their bills. We've got I hear talk back all the time, pensioners calling up and saying they're staying in bed under the doona because that's where it's warm and they want to limit the time that they're using energy because of the cost. How have we got so lost in the human impact of this as we've gone down the policy of transitioning to renewables?
I think it really goes to this issue that Vivek raised of what's your goal? What are you optimizing for? You know, he talked about human prosperity. I often use the term human flourishing. But when you look at the energy and climate goals pursued around the world, their number one goal is far from human prosperity or human flourishing. It's all about eliminating our impact on climate. That's what net zero means. That's what carbon neutral means. There's just this obsession with basically it's a commandment, thou shalt not impact climate. And they're willing to sacrifice everything to that. And I argue in Fossil Future, that's a symptom of this broader goal of eliminating human impact on Earth, the belief that humans are evil, that our impact is evil, the Earth is better off without us somehow. And so everything we should do should sort of be to apologize and minimize our presence. And people who have that view love CO2 to attack because then you get to attack fossil fuels, you get to attack all of human industry, and you pretend that you want to replace it with green energy. But as we've seen, there's no viable replacement anytime soon. It's really just hostility to fossil fuels and industry and ultimately to humanity, because for humans to prosper means for us to impact the Earth. So if you hate impact, then you hate prosperity.